हेलो एंड वेलकम टू अनदर एपिसोड ऑफ पाकिस्तानमी। मेरा नाम उज़ैर यूनुस है और आज की आई थिंक कॉन्वर्जेशन थोड़ी इंग्लिश में थोड़ी उर्दू में होगी। मेरे साथ मौजूद हैं मेरी पहली एडिटर, जो हर दफ़ा भूल जाती हैं कि ये मेरी पहली एडिटर थी, माहिम महर। माहिम को मैं काफ़ी सालों से जानता हूँ और शुरुआत हमारी रिलेशनशिप की उस वक्त हुई 2016 में, मुझे याद है, कि जिसे लोग कहते हैं प्रो पीएमएल नून फ्राइडे टाइम्स। उस पे उनको चाहिए था एक लॉन्ग फॉर्म एनालिसिस मईशत के ऊपर, और मैंने एक लॉन्ग फॉर्म एनालिसिस लिखा विच वाज वेरी एंटी इसहाक डार, और वो चलाया गया। और वो आई वाज वेरी हैप्पी कि ओ आई एम राइटिंग अ लॉन्ग फॉर्म एनालिसिस पीस ऑन the economy and a magazine is publishing it. But more importantly, Mahim is a former digital editor and a journalist whose writings and views on Karachi in particular are amazing. If you want to understand what's wrong with Karachi, what works, what doesn't work, look up her articles and the coverage she's done. I've included some links in the description as well. So Mahim, thank you so much. Kafi invitations ke baad you've joined this podcast, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, the only reason why I was able to give you time now is because I'm a Berozgar Sahafi because I just left my job at Aj News as the digital editor, which is interesting. It's good to be Berozgar.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you will be Berozgar for too long, because I think amazing talent in Pakistan is hard to come by, and you're certainly in the top 1%. I want to begin by sort of explaining to the audience your own career trajectory, right? How did you end up being a digital editor and covering Karachi? Like, what was that journey like? And the reason I ask this is because later on the podcast, I'll ask you about young journalists, what should they do, not do. So perhaps set the context about your own journey and some of the things you've picked up along the way.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It sounds a bit like sort of boring to sort of go over what my career was like. Um, but so I did my O levels from St. Joseph's. I flunked throughout my O levels. Then I did my A levels. And then I went to McGill University and I started studying math. And वो भी कुछ गड़बड़ी हो गई, so I converted it from a major to a minor. And then I decided to study Russian and German. And I was very good at languages. Excuse me. So I took French and Spanish as well. And then I studied creative writing at Concordia University for a year and I came back. Here I just started writing for the Friday Times. And then when Najm City started Daily Times, मेरे ख्याल से वहाँ से connection बनी. My first editor was Naveen Mangi. She was a family friend and she was the editor for the business section at Daily Times. And she called me in because I was teaching maths at City School as well, part-time. And I turned out to be a really good sub-editor. So I was with the business pages covering the stock market, like sub-editing. I was a super sub because obviously my English skills were really great. So Daily Times में मेरी शुरुआत थी and I didn't know any better. मेरी कुछ पता नहीं 12,000 तनख्वाह थी उस वक्त. But I learned a lot being in the newsroom with the reporters. And I was fascinated because they would like not take me to the press club. They wouldn't want to be seen with me. मुझे कहीं लेके नहीं जाते थे and they kept telling me कि बीबी आप तो यहाँ नहीं जा सकती, or they thought because I was a rich little like a burger living in
बर्गर
Tipton
खातून है.
तो बन कबाब वाली हरकतें नहीं करनी है. अच्छा, मुझे बाइक पे बैठ के जाने का, कराची में लियारी जाने का शौक था. और one of my friends, he lived in Martin Quarters, Guru Mandir, so Teen Hatti वगैरह, like काफी. I wanted to find out about the city, and then if you told me you can't go there, तो then I had to go. So करते करते हुआ ये कि I was at Dawn and the Herald as well. कम कम तनख्वाहों पे, just Young World की भी editor, acting editor रह चुकी हूँ. Letters section में भी काम किया है. I took a pay cut to work at Dawn. And then Najm Sethi. So it was kind of interesting when there was a lot of politics at Daily Times with the bureau chief. So I told Najm Sethi, look, I'm going to leave. And he said, okay, you can leave, but on one condition, that you come back when I call you. तो मैंने कहा ये क्या बात हुई, like कौन सा editor ऐसी बात करता है. So I said, अच्छा ठीक है. So I was at Herald one day and he called me and he said, okay, MM, it's time for you to come back because I want you to start the metro section, to launch the Daily Times metro section for Karachi, for the Karachi edition. And then pehle sare national pages hote the. So I was 28 at the time and I became, I mean, to the best of my knowledge, the first female city editor at 28. And I knew nothing, but I was apolitical. I wasn't a Jamati or a, there were no, I wasn't part of the press club thing, So I joined and the reporters, they were all bewildered because the coverage, I wanted it to be something I wanted to read, not something that you'd find in the Dawn Metro section or the news. Us waqt, I can't remember, I think Hasnat Saab hote the at Dawn ke city pages. So I had a lot of fun. So that became kind of my thing, covering Karachi. Us waqt it was very, very a bloody Karachi. There were a lot of bomb blasts and, a lot of stuff happening. Karte karte then beach mein I went for some fellowships and, went to do my master's in Australia. And then, I was with Sama TV for a while. And then Bilal Lakhani started the Express Tribune. So Kamal Siddiqui, who was an old friend of mine at Dawn, he said, look, you have to be the city editor. So I said, yeah, that's okay. So I remember this meeting with Bilal Lakhani. We sat with all of the metro sections and I said, well, all of this is just trash. It's all crap. And this is what I think a city coverage should be like. So we clicked. And he was a good boss to me, actually. He was a good publisher. So we produced a beautiful newspaper, the Express Tribune, uska crime map bhi banaya. And we had a great team. Kamal Siddiqui started that newspaper from scratch. We had the New York Times publishing with us. It was really great.
I remember the crime map in particular.
Yeah. So that newspaper was designed by Jacek Utko, who was a Polish award-winning designer. And Bilal Lakhani was really smart. The design for the Tribune was out of this world. And he had one extra page in the B section. So he said, what do you want to put on it? And I said, well, I would love to have a crime map because I thought कि Karachi के रोज की अगर reporting हो जाए तो उसमें dots लगा लें तो एक visible वो एक चीज
और अगर आप कराची से हैं तो कराची में अगर आपकी मगिंग नहीं हुई हो तो फिर आप कराची वाले नहीं जाने
तो
जाते
है नहीं, right? So we started that, and then so the Tribune did a lot of great art, a lot of reporting. Us waqt bhi it was a very bloody city. In fact, just now I was watching the news, and Murtaza Wahab has just been elected mayor. So, bade dino baad we have a mayor. Us waqt you still had city council running and a lot of development. You had Mustafa Kamal and Tamir Karachi program, that kind of stuff. So there was a lot to report on. There's a lot of violence. वो बहुत cover किया. And we had some great reporters like Saba Imtiaz was covering the anti-terrorism courts. She was assigned to the city desk and she asked me like, well, what beat do you want me to do? So I looked at her and I was like, she had come from the life and style desk. So I said, well, Saba, no one's covering the ATC. Chali jaogi. So she looked at me and she was like, yeah, okay. And I tell you, she's brilliant. She went and covered the anti-terrorism courts. So Gliari ke bhi gang war chal rahe the. Then a lot of our data journalism, jo hamari mapping thi, one of our maps of Karachi's no-go areas was used in the Supreme Court ki jo Badamni case hai 2013 ki mere khayal se. So we did a lot of fun stuff. Then I took a break. Then I was at the Friday Times, which was great fun because I got to edit people like Dr. Aisha Siddiqa. I met you, I met Asad, so it was interesting. And then one day I got a call from Moise Jaffrey, who you know, and they were looking for an editor for digital at Sama. And I never watched Sama, so I didn't know what it was like. And I'm mostly an English medium journalist, so I was like, भाई मैंने उनको मना किया. मैंने कहा भाई मैं नाम आपको दे देती हूँ, आप किसी और को रख लें, मुझे डिजिटल के बारे में कुछ नहीं पता. They said, no, we want an editor. I said, are you sure? So this was जो Sama के owner हैं Zafar Siddiqui, उनकी बेटी Sara Siddiqui was the vice chairperson. So she and Naveed Siddiqui interviewed me. मैं उनको बहुत convince करने की कोशिश की that I was the wrong choice. And then I joined, and And it was very interesting what we did at Sama. We launched Sama Money. We launched 6 verticals, a health vertical during COVID. We did a lot of animated infographics. We had a young team, amazing people. Now they're at other places. And then uske baad, when I left Sama after 4 years, I was sitting around, and the guy who does the development for Pehle, he was doing the Tribune. Then he was doing Dawn for a long time, Aleem Bhavani. Him and Ahmed Zubairi and Bilal Mehman was sitting together. Bilal Mehman was the head of digital at Business Recorder, is the editor there. And they were kind of thinking of someone to do Aaj Digital for the BR group. So Aleem very kindly mentioned my name. If anyone can fix it, it's Mahim. So I had a nice conversation with Ahmed Zubairi, and I was there for a little over a year, cleaning out the digital property. Usme, obviously, Aaj TV has its own brand and that kind of stuff, you know. So it was very, very challenging work. We couldn't do this sort of same stuff that we did at Sama. But I certainly had a lot of fun. Like I wrote about the Supreme Court and golden retrievers, and we did a lot of like funny things. So that was also a decent job. So that just wrapped up. So digital is really, I never want to do digital again in my life.
I rarely meet a editor or journalist who says they want to do digital. I think we'll get to that as well. Like there's a disdain among journalists for what digital is, rightfully so to an extent. Yes. So, I mean, look, I want to start with sort of the early coverage you did, right? The crime map covering Karachi. I still refer back to when people, like, even in, you know, when I see family and they talk something about Karachi, ke ye masla hai aur ye hai. So I go back to some of the work you've done on this in terms of wo ek article hai DHA mein drains nahi बनाई उन्होंने. एक आर्टिकल है केएमसी की बजट्स के ऊपर के पैसे कितने मिलते थे और अब कितने मिलते हैं एटसेट्रा सो दोज आर अमेजिंग explainers in a country or in a place even among Karachiites who talk a lot about Karachi's issues but never really fully understand the complicated nature of those issues, right? Everything from funding to infrastructure to the fact that KMC doesn't even have more than 40% of the land under its own management, right? ये भी लोगों को नहीं पता बात. So help us understand, as you've covered and looked at this city, मोटरसाइकिल पे बैठने का आपको बड़ा शौक था, लियारी घूमने का. What have you managed to understand about the city's local politics, and why is it that it's in the state it is in today? For example, we're talking about a cyclone coming, or log basically, at least in my networks, have accepted the fact that DHA अगर आया ये सैलाब और ये बारिश आई तो DHA ने तो डूबना ही डूबना है क्योंकि वहाँ मोइंजोदड़ो से बुरा हाल है, right? And Mohenjo-daro probably had better drainage than the city of Karachi does. So what help the audience understand from your experience what ails this city?
So yeah, that's a lot to ask for. It's a big question. I can't give like, you know, I could go off and into detail, but मैं सोच रही थी इसके बारे में because I get asked this question a lot. And ये like Karachi ऐसा क्यों है? People also like they've been asking me for years. Look, I think it's a mega city. You know, I mean 20 million. You know, it's up there. By default, Karachi is really ungovernable. It's just too big. And then, you know, if you look at the institutions that are supposed to run a city, right? Like local government institutions, KMC, KDA, KWSB, KBCA, all of these institutions, पहले ये बहुत अच्छे होते थे. If you sit with Arif Hassan or you read the books, you know, Karachi की planning बहुत अच्छी थी. उस वक्त maybe the population was a little bit more manageable. But if you go to Nazmabad and Muhammad Ali Society, you can feel के planning हुई भी है सड़कों की. But fractured governance is the problem in Karachi because there's so many agencies that are, you know, ये बात सबने की है, ये बहुत पुरानी बात है. Everyone understands कि कोई एक अब मेयर मुर्तजा वहाब आए हैं, and I wish him luck, but he controls very little. So, you know, that is the number one problem. So if you have a DHA, a DHA city, a barrier town, or you have DHA, if you look at it, we were just talking about the drainage. I was interviewing some people from the KWSSIP, the World Bank's project. And DHA में पहले जो storm water drainage थी वो KMC वालों ने जाकर उसको they kind of KWSP वालों ने जाके थोड़ी सी help की when they had the flooding the first time. वो जो Dr. Bashir Lakhani ने I wrote about that how he
वो जो सड़कों के बीच में नाले
बीच
बनाए,
वाली जो गडगड वाली है ना वो जो बनाई. So if you have powerful authorities like DHA that will go into real estate and not feel the need to put themselves under the umbrella of KMC and the master plan department, you're going to have trouble. और मुझे तो हैरत ये होती है, like when Karachi flooded, वो जो proper flooding हुई थी कुछ साल पहले, मुझे हंसी आ रही थी कि DHA के जो लोग हैं, इतने बड़े बड़े घर, इतने अमीर लोग रहते हैं, they can buy everything. उनके घर पे पानी का टैंकर आ जाएगा, उनके घर पे पिज्जा आ जाएगा, उनको घर छोड़ना नहीं पड़ेगा. They can order everything to their house. The one thing that those idiots couldn't do is buy a collective stormwater drainage system. Because वो अपनी गेट के बाहर जो हो रहा है उसकी, आप सबने प्लॉट ले लिया, आपने ये नहीं सोचा कि यहाँ मेरे घर के सामने कोई ड्रेन नहीं है.
इनफैक्ट मैं अपने दोस्तों से जो एक दो रहते हैं DHA में, जिनके घर कभी जाता हूँ एंड आई एम विजिटिंग, तो यही मजाक करता हूँ कि यार तुम्हारे घर की वैल्यू कैश प्राइस, पाकिस्तान में तो मॉर्गेज का भी इतना सिस्टम नहीं है, कैश प्राइस लेट्स से $1 मिलियन के करीब है, ओवर $500,000 कह दें, ओवर $500,000 का घर है, गराज में जो है ई-ट्रॉन खड़ी हुई है या टोयोटा टंड्रा खड़ी हुई है, और तुम्हारे घर में बिजली नहीं आती, साफ पीने का पानी नहीं आता, और बाहर गटर का पानी खड़ा हुआ है, और थोड़ी सी बारिश हो जाए तो तुम्हारी बेसमेंट फ्लड हो जाती है. तो ये कैसा $1 मिलियन का घर है जिसपे ये सारी चीजें हैं नहीं बेसिक.
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल यही मसला है. Because there's this, and Arif Hassan explains it very well. I won't go into the details, but where the shift happened, where the plot became really like, the most important thing to acquire. There was this whole thinking, उन्होंने काफी अच्छा लिखा हुआ, I might share the link with you later. But this was this business of not having a master plan and a strategic land use master plan. And then you have Faisal cantonment और बाकी जगहें जो हैं, तो ये मसला है. The other problem, the reason why, and I wrote about this because, so my stories, उन पे मैं 3-3 महीने लगाती हूँ. The line of inquiry develops very early on, and वो 6 साल बैठा रहता है, the idea. So from Daily Times, I had this idea कि how does municipal finance work? And budget हर साल हम cover करते थे, मगर मुझे समझ नहीं आती थी. And all of the journalism that one does comes from a place of unknowingness, of not knowing. So as a female, I'm not necessarily sitting around pontificating as a know-it-all. I actually confess I do not know how this works, तो
मुझे याद है वो स्पीकिंग ऑफ दैट पॉइंट, जब मैंने आर्टिकल लिखा था तो आपकी बड़ी लंबी लिस्ट सवालों की आई थी कि ये समझाओ, समझ नहीं आ रही, क्या क्या रहे हो. एंड इट वाजंट दैट आई वाज नॉट मेकिंग सेंस. आई लेटर रियलाइज एज आई रेड थ्रू द ईमेल अ कपल ऑफ टाइम्स दैट यू आर आस्किंग फ्रॉम दैट लाइन ऑफ इंक्वायरी के यू शुड understand something before you hit send and publish it on
भाई
something.
आप current account deficit बोलेंगे तो I'll be like, oh, what is that? I still don't know what the current account deficit is. And a lot of people don't. And it's okay if you explain things. And I learned how to write like this from Steven Pinker. उनकी बहुत अच्छी किताब है, A Sense of Style, if anyone's interested in reading it. He talks about cognitive uptake. So we assume a lot, and I find a lot of men like to sound very important and तज्ज़ियाकारी and all, मगर किसी को कुछ पल्ले नहीं पड़ रहा. इसका सबसे बड़ा मिसाल ये था कि सुप्रीम कोर्ट का मसला हुआ था, तो people asked me on Twitter कि माहिम कुछ समझ नहीं आ रहा है, can you explain it to me as if I were a 5-year-old? Someone else tweeted below that, explain it to me as if I'm a golden retriever. तो मैंने कहा ठीक है, मुझे भी मस्ती सूझी हुई थी, मैं भी थोड़ी सी बदतमीज हूँ, तो मैंने उसामा खावर गुम्मन से लंबी इंटरव्यू की, and whatever he said to explain the whole Supreme Court thing, I used the WhatsApp emoji balls and I wrote it in a Kunk on Earth style voice of explaining the Supreme Court thing for golden retrievers. And that's how I've approached all my stories. So the municipal finance thing, I said, कराची का बजट ऐसा क्यों है और हर मेयर के दौर में वो क्यों होता है? आप ब्लूमबर्ग या वॉल स्ट्रीट जर्नल की इंफोग्राफिक्स देखते हैं, they'll go, by tenure of the central bank, chairperson, Greenspan or whatever, and you'll see the dollar rate. They do fun things that make it, easy to understand. So I did that, and as I started digging, I was like, I spoke to a very good bureaucrat, and he said, look, Karachi has lots of money. Karachi is a rich city, you just said so yourself. So why is its city government so poor? In fact, I'll give you some numbers. Over 6 days in March, 1.2 billion, just 6 days, 1.2 billion rupees was collected in property tax from 81,000 chalans in Karachi. Now, if you have that 1.2 billion, maybe it's not a lot of money, but 6 दिन की अगर real estate tax से ये मिल रहा है, तो that is how cities have to learn. And there are financial instruments, municipal bonds by which cities can learn how to pay for themselves.
And speaking of property taxes, I've spoken about this on the podcast, so perhaps a lot of the audience already knows. It's a fun fact, and you reminded me of this. The Indian city of Jaipur, for example, or Pune, I think it was, collects far more in property taxes than the entire province of Sindh. So you can just imagine the money that's being left on the table by a really shoddy property tax infrastructure.
Yes. And so मेरी तजवीज़ ये है कि all of these people who live in Karachi, except for the truly underprivileged people, don't bitch and moan about it if you're not paying taxes to make the city run. Yes, okay, you can say the People's Party, the MQM, the Jamaat Islami, sab corrupt, and these institutions are corrupt. But the fact is that you guys aren't paying for your water. पानी का plot के हिसाब से rate आता है. I mean, hydrants, in our city, we drive our water around. It's the stupidest thing.
मेरा कल पानी का बिल आया डीसी में, गैस करें कितना होगा?
स्लैब कितना है? टैरिफ क्या है?
नहीं, टैरिफ के स्लैब, हम 2 लोग रहते हैं घर के अंदर, तो लोएस्ट टैरिफ जो हो सकता है वही है, कोई इतना ज्यादा पानी का कंजम्पशन नहीं होता। $90 आया है पानी का। जी
मैं आ रही हूँ बस वॉशिंगटन, फॉगी बॉटम।
आप हिसाब लगा ले, $300 के हिसाब से 100 कर लें उसका हिसाब, तो कितना बनता है। तो यू पे फॉर वाटर, एंड दिस इज अमार खान टॉक्स अ लॉट अबाउट दिस, कि आप पानी की प्राइसिंग, आप एक मुल्क में जहां पानी है नहीं, आप पानी पे प्राइस नहीं लगाते।
Yes. So, so basically you have these problems, and then what you have is these institutions, they don't have people in them. I met a really wonderful former sort of water board sort of senior person, and he's sitting with some other kind of company. उनके बाद कोई अच्छे इंजीनियर्स हैं ही नहीं वाटर बोर्ड में। केडीए के अंदर अच्छे सारे अच्छे ब्यूरोक्रेट्स, प्लानर्स, अर्बन प्लानर्स, मास्टर प्लान के दफ्तर में सिर्फ 2 लोग थे, उनमें से एक निकल गए। सिंध बिल्डिंग कंट्रोल अथॉरिटी, मतलब सो the elite of Karachi, these kids, people like maybe you or me or whatever, right? The intellectual elite. We didn't join government service to go into KMC. So I have maintained, I mean, I understand the conditions are difficult and all, but there's no brain power. No one thinks कि KMC में जाके काम करना है, So that also didn't help. As I did story after story after story, writing about the billboards, writing about the nalas, writing about the water, road networks, housing, etc. I got sick of it because every story ended up with the same theme: bad design and bad decisions. And now I don't want to write about Karachi anymore because it's so depressing. So I mean, unfortunately, that's the way Karachi is. It's huge, it's unmanageable, it doesn't have a financial way of functioning, and the institutions that should be running it, they are gutted out, and it's already like fractured land ownership. So big business, real estate is more powerful than government, essentially. And then there's a lot of government corruption.
Which again, I think again, the important part, right? Like the big business and development real estate part is, there's always this tension in any major city, right? I mean, We just went through a few months ago a mayoral election in Washington. Mayor Bowser won her third term, and her biggest criticism in the campaign was that she's in quote unquote bed with real estate developers because causing gentrification, it's causing issues with development. A lot of people in poor areas are unhappy because, again, the financial way the city works is that development happens, then tax rates go up, the city collects more money. But then if the tax rates go up, the poor who are living on the corner in that same lot of land have to pay more taxes. They can't afford it, so they have to sell. They get pushed out of their historic family homes as a result. So they're very angry about what happens, right? That's just one example. But you have to, if you have a continuing structure of local politics, the city council then reflects that. Some people come in who are rabble rousers. There's institutional memory. There's some money associated with, like, okay, let's keep these constituents happy, so we'll pay for, if you're elderly and your home is in disrepair, the city has a fund that is paid for through some property taxes, etc. But we don't have any of that in Karachi, right? And I think your point on the elites, intellectual elites, not going into public service is so important, because you look at a city like New York, where, and when I lived there, this was right around the sort of, end of the Mike Bloomberg era. And I was like, hey, yaar, he changed that city for the better. Some will criticize him for stop and frisk and all of that. And yes, those are legitimate things. But from an infrastructure development, what New York stood for, he fundamentally changed that city. He put a tax on freaking soda, or log bade gusse hue, or he banned smoking indoors. So even at a public health level, he had an impact. But for a multi-billionaire to be willing to do that is amazing, right? Just as a matter of principle. We don't see that in public service in Karachi or in Pakistan. I think that's a big shame as well, that you don't have people who've made it in life say, you know what, I take ownership of my own community and I'm going to try to change it around. And I think Karachi is perhaps the exhibit A, I would put it over there.
Yeah, there's been this exit, of the elite, from, I mean, people in my family, they don't go anywhere in Karachi beyond Sindh Club, let's say, or Hotel Metropole. मुझे तो बहाना चाहिए. I mean, the other day someone said, "Sadkhane jana hai." मैंने कहा चलो. But no, Karachi scares people. They're not interested. It's huge. It's decrepit. But then everyone's just wondering, why did it get there? But no one's willing to, understand. And the journalism, I mean, I'm not the only one who's been writing about Karachi. You have like oodles of journalism. People have been writing for a long time. All of the NED professors and, the Sir Syed Arif Hassan, Dr. Noman, Dr. Nausheen, they're all doing a lot of work which talks about what is going on with the environment, with the city. So the information is there for all of in fact, the World Bank people, they always go in and they go meet Arif Hassan and they talk to him. So it's not like you don't know कि करना क्या है. Even right now, the water board, they're doing reforms. They're going to turn the Karachi Water and Sewage Board into a corporation. And the CEO who they have appointed is not a good CEO. And so even though on paper, the act, the new law looks really, really good, this is what I was talking about in the interview, the corruption of the choice of people to run the water board is going to not work. In fact, abhi like hydrants के ऊपर इनने bulk metering लगानी है. So I found out that 40 lakh का तो bribe मिला है, someone really high up, to delay putting the meters on. There are 8 hydrants in Karachi, तो वो tender के through outsource होते हैं and all that. So there is water, and that's another myth. There is water for Karachi. It has to be managed properly. So everything can be done, but politically, the parties that are there, they don't do the right thing. That is the biggest. I mean, whether it was the MQM or the People's Party, they think they have power. The MQM was in power for 10 years, roughly the People's Party for 10 years as well, almost equal by the time I was writing that municipal finance piece. And I compared the performance, and they were both just, they all have this love affair with infrastructure. They want to build roads, flyovers. No one wants to get into the plumbing. जो visible नहीं है चीजें. And then what is interesting me these days is why the World Bank is giving hundreds of millions of dollars of debt. We're taking on these loans to build infrastructure and you know, I mean, I think a system's broken if you need the World Bank loans to build infrastructure in your city.
Yeah.
So वो बहुत ज़्यादा People's Party ने किया है. So I'm very skeptical about these things.
Yeah.
World Bank.
No, those are important points because World Bank say, Karachi obviously is part of this. They've given a significant amount of money over the years to the FBR for tax capacity building. People of Pakistan have borrowed that money essentially. You look at the tax infrastructure, क्या काम हुआ उस पे $400 million के loans हैं. Outcome जो है वो 0+0 है. आपने बात की लोगों की तैनाती के ऊपर. Kal I was looking at when Shell exited Pakistan, the news was like, and you write an explainer on the reasons for this. So I was going back to some of my old notes. 2020 की जो petroleum inquiry report थी, उसका सबसे fun fact जो है, वो ये है कि पाकिस्तान का उस वक्त DG oil जो था at Ogra, I think, who basically the person who oversees the entire oil marketing company ecosystem in Pakistan, was a veterinary doctor. जानवरों के डॉक्टर को आपने ऑयल बनाया हुआ था. और इस वक्त पंजाब के एनर्जी सेक्रेटरी जो हैं वो MBBS डॉक्टर हैं. तो आप सोच लें, आप उनकी लिंक्डइन अगर खोलें तो उन्होंने इमिग्रेशन पासपोर्ट पे भी काम किया है, उन्होंने एनवायरनमेंट पे भी काम किया है, उन्होंने MBBS डिग्री भी ली हुई है, वो कैनेडी स्कूल भी गए हुए हैं, वो LSE भी गए हुए हैं, और अब वो एनर्जी के ऊपर पंजाब को देख रहे हैं. So when you put people like that, like, when there's no technical expertise coming into these very technical jobs, the outcome is what we're talking about, right? I want to move on to now the second part of your own career and journey, which is, digital media. And as you said, you don't like it. Nobody really likes it. Everybody I talk to, even over here in DC, they don't really like the digital disruption. Tell us about what the digital media ecosystem has done to journalism in Pakistan, right? I mean, the vlog culture, the idea that you can sort of say whatever you want, there's no holds barred. But then at the same time, when I look at, and this again, I would love your thoughts on this, look at major channels and their digital media strategy. Barring the places you've been at, it's basically YouTube पे लगा दो जो television पे चल रहा है, और वो हमारी digital media है, quote unquote. What's going on with this ecosystem, and how do you see, and how have you seen this evolve, and what's worked, what's not worked here?
Well, it is true. So I think for a lot of these TV channels, digital is just like a dumping ground for जो TV पे चल रहा है, जो आपकी screen पे चल रहा है. अच्छा, interestingly enough, perhaps there's nothing wrong with that, okay? Because and we can't be too judgmental of it, but you had these companies and these kids, these guys, they came in and they knew how YouTube worked and stuff, and so they said, भाई इससे हम पैसे कमा सकते हैं, ठीक है, जुगाड़ करके फेसबुक की मोनेटाइजेशन अंडर द टेबल हो जाता है, वो भी इन लोगों ने करवा लिया इधर उधर से, दुबई शुबई से, whatever, right, through these middlemen. So the dollars started to come in. Now that's not a bad thing. And I think for veracity's sake, it is a good thing that जो जियो का स्क्रीन है या ARY का स्क्रीन है या समा का स्क्रीन है, आपको YouTube पे वही नजर आए. Because then you can tell it's the TV, right? When you talk about cyberspace is weird. When you put information out there, it disappears in time and space. But if you have the wahi TV screen, you have the timestamp, you have the date and the time. That actually can be very helpful when you're looking at misinformation and disinformation. But yes, true digital or creative digital journalism, as you see in the Washington Times or the New York, the Washington Post and New York Times, is very different, and a lot of other sort of smaller sort of creators. And this is what digital should have done. So these TV channels come along and YouTube ki desks ban jate hain, the dudes are kind of uploading it, they're making money, the malik or seth is happy, theek hai, that happens. And a lot of these, I think these media owners, they didn't particularly care how it happened, the nitty gritty or the digital security, etc., etc. So ये एक पूरी industry बन जाती है, which is fine. But then it started to get more challenging. अच्छा, audiences भी आपकी ठीक ठाक बन गए, millions of views हैं, thousands of dollars आ रहे हैं. But then you have an entire new cape generation coming up that is not interested in the TV screen. Plus, Twitter comes up, and so your WhatsApp comes up, so dark social. So you're getting your breaking news. You're getting it from the TV, and you're getting it on WhatsApp or Twitter. What happens after that for journalism? So the difficulty is that a lot of these YouTube desks were just NLEs paid 25,000 rupees a month to cut OBS से grabbing करो या Premiere पे डालो, cut करो और लगाओ, ठीक है? उस वक्त YouTube की community and advertiser guidelines were also extremely, different. So then you have the media owners realizing that, something else needs to happen to attract younger audiences as well. But you don't have the teams who editorially know how to produce that content. And in the meantime, you see a lot of young people disillusioned with mainstream media who are taking on and doing their vlogs and their information sharing. You have Facebook groups, where all of the information is being exchanged. So if you study Jürgen Habermas and the theory of the public sphere, it becomes very, very clear then that the monopoly of the public sphere is no longer with the mainstream media, and it has moved into these cyber communities, these tiny communities, the way, I interpret it. So then the whole game changes. Obviously, I think the good thing is that, people, independent creators, they've been able to make money, which previously was not going to be possible because you can't not everyone can join a media house or an advertising firm or the film industry or the television drama industry. Itni si hai. So all of these independent creators, they've gotten this source of income. So I think for them, it's a great thing. The other thing that was really good is that with Twitter and digital tools that generally Pakistanis started to use, then you started to see some real accountability and pushback. And I love that because पहले आपको रत्तो डेरों में जो HIV का ये कोई something has happened, you wouldn't hear about it until a video surfaces on social. So it forced a lot of journalists to reckon with real stories. They still don't entirely listen or treat that material properly, but we're seeing that people now will look at that. A lot of women, for example, there was an entire thing on Twitter where women were calling out their harassers. Or, then there was
recently हुआ है ट्विटर पे एक नमाजी पूरा इस्लामी बायलाइन है उनकी बायो की नाम मैं उनका भूल रहा हूँ and I don't know who posted it but he sent like dick pics over to this woman and she made it public.
Oh yes, I saw that.
And then this guy was sending her DMs कि ये private मामला है आप इसको delete कर दे वो यार तुम अपनी बायो देखो मुसलमान जो है वो मतलब जो तुमने बायो में लिखा हुआ है कि पूरे तुम हाजी हो और हरकतें अपनी देखो.
So this is previously it was just a one-way street with the newspapers or the TV, right? So now it's just imploded, which is great for marginalized communities. All of these boys in universities in across Sindh, उन्होंने domicile का जो है fake domicile का hashtag चलाया and it forced the Sindh government to form a commission to investigate this. So real power has it's shifted. That said, the media has the big media houses, they're really like, for me, they're sweatshops. And the pool of talent of people, we don't have good training here. They come in and the salary structures, the working conditions, the stress levels, the performance, the stress to deliver the numbers of eyeballs. And then on digital, then aap jis tarah ki harkatein kar rahe. I had a sort of, this stuff that you talk about technique. The other day I tweeted that if you look at Capital TV on its YouTube page, you go to the videos tab and you tap popular and you see what are its top most popular videos. Now, Capital TV's rating is probably not that amazing, right? And it's not something you would maybe watch. or whatever, you wouldn't go to its website. But its popular videos are in 2-3 million views because they've scraped stuff from the internet and they've put it on their YouTube. So that's not journalism to me. So these kind of practices then come in, and then newsrooms are already struggling. I was struggling at Aj because the kind of journalism that I felt was important, it wasn't getting the kind of revenue that was needed. So then the awam, they want something, that is whatever it is. So these systems are slowly breaking down, and only the big media houses are going to survive. And the small to medium ones are just going to be these terrible sweatshops for desperate people who graduate with a degree in IR from KU, or some guys with like a little bit of editing skills. तो वो video editor NLE लग जाते हैं. And the beat reporters, they are struggling to move into digital as well. So it's not that transition isn't happening. Just sahi ke beat reporters hai, they are not moving into it. So you see a dearth of good reporting. And the young people who are joining as journalists, they're getting such bad working conditions. I just brought on an NED graduate who's really smart. I could only pay him 45,000 rupees. And he can do entire surveys and he can do his mapping. He did some wonderful road mapping for us, but 45,000 rupees for a graduate from NED is shameful. And he was very passionate about the work, and I promised I'd sort of teach him everything I knew. But how are you going to get quality city government reporting? If these new guys, it's going to take them a good 5-10 years. They can't sustain 5-10 years in the media industry to become good beat reporters. How important did you feel it was to have a good economy reporter, a good court reporter in the last 6 months or a year? Someone who would actually go into those numbers or understand macroeconomics. But those people are dying out. And a lot of the educated elite kids, they obviously don't want to join the industry because the working conditions are terrible. So I'm not terribly hopeful. And then the other last point about digital media is that big tech, Google, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter is in meltdown. They're squeezing news publishers off. The YouTube CPM is 16 cents to the dollar for 1,000 views for Pakistan. I think it's something like $9 in New Zealand. So the pressure is intense. The Google AdSense, I could have 6.4 million page views and only earn $100, right? And then Facebook is pushing off news publishers, So, and then Google with Bard and its new generative search, it's going to scrape all of the work we've done and just give it to you in a summary. So it's not looking very good from the big tech side. And in Pakistan, you have to censor a lot of material. YouTube की community guidelines ऐसी हैं कि कोई वर्दी वगैरह कुछ दिखा लो, बुरहान वानी की तस्वीर दिखा दो तो आपकी video demonetize हो जाती है. So the advertising guidelines, the community guidelines are becoming very, very strict. So the payouts are not that good unless you're really like Geo or ARY. Baki, people are struggling. So the CPM is really low. And then there's censorship that you get from within Pakistan from big business. So you can't touch Food Panda. You can't touch Bahria Town. You can't touch Kareem.
But why can't you touch Food Panda? Elaborate. Because I think people get the Bahria Town part. But ये Food Panda Kareem की क्या story है?
वो उनकी तरफ से कॉलें आ गई हैं, खबरें हटाएं. ये मेरे साथ एक at one media house ये हुआ है. You can't write about PTCL. And they are still not even the worst sort of censor wale entities. There's a lot of other, you just don't go there, like reporting on the Rangers. You can't do it. I did a story on how the Rangers, actually one of the kids did a story on the Rangers taking over bus depots for the Red Line BRT. So the Rangers PRO called up and screamed at me, and he complained to the Zubairis about me. So, and then whatever stuff happens.
रेंजर से याद आया, यहाँ 2 हफ्ते पहले एक बड़े सीनियर पाकिस्तानी शख्स आए हुए थे, गवर्नमेंट से नहीं, बिजनेस एलीट से उनका ताल्लुक है, गवर्नमेंट से भी एक तरह से जुड़े हुए हैं, तो वो बात करने लग गए कि देखें फौज जो है बड़ी ज़रूरी है पाकिस्तान के लिए, और आप देख लें कराची में अगर रेंजर्स ना हो तो कराची का फिर क्या हाल होगा, क्या कराची कंट्रोल में रहेगा कि नहीं। तो मैंने उनको जब थोड़ा मौका मिला 10 सेकंड का उनसे रिबट करने का, बड़ी रिस्पेक्टफुली करके कि सर आई वेरी थैंकफुल रिस्पेक्टफुली, अगर शायद कराची से रेंजर्स निकाल दिए जाएं तो कराची वालों को शायद पीने का पानी आसानी से मिलना शुरू हो जाए। तो उसका उनके पास जवाब नहीं था। तो योर बस डिपो स्टोरी एंड थिंग्स लाइक दैट इज लाइक there is this view, particularly among the non-Karachi elites of Pakistan, कि rangers ने कराची को
No,
जोड़ के रखा हुआ है. There are a
no.
huge problem in the political
हाँ,
economy of the
yeah.
city.
Yes, they, in fact, if you go to the hydrants, वहाँ पे उनका जो कंप्यूटर ऑपरेटर है एक्सेल शीट मेंटेन सखी हसन वाले पे मेंटेन करते हैं। तो वहां से एक जमाने में मैंने निकलवाई थी, तो ऊपर टॉप पे वो जो एक टैब था, एक शीट था, वो रेंजर्स वाला था, और वो मुझे नहीं मिली। So like it's none of their business to be in the hydrant business, like, so but you can't take it on, it's too tricky. um so yeah, there is this, but you can still do a lot of journalism regardless, like वो मसला नहीं है, मगर वो हो नहीं रही जो होनी चाहिए local government की useful journalism, for people to make their lives better, like the DHA stormwater drainage, is one example. इतना बड़ा infrastructure, the Malir Expressway, खैर उस पे काफी काम हुआ है. But even just at the UC level, we need to have more reporting, more hyper-local reporting. So yeah, that's kind of answering your digital media thing. Um,
And I think the one thing that's interesting over there also, right, is that the two very interesting stories in the last 10 days or so that I've come across in Western media, right? One was the journal's exclusive on Instagram and its failure to clamp down on child pornography, which was done in partnership with Stanford, right? So the link between academia and good journalism, and then from your point of view, what you were talking about, putting it in a way that the average citizen can understand, right? The visuals or the way the language is structured, etc. And then the second one, recently, Bloomberg did an internal research investigation on how generative AI is basically reinforcing racial stereotypes. So they did a
yes, I
whole
saw that.
host of research on skin pigmentation, terrorist कैसा दिखता है, और executive की शक्ल और gender क्या होता है from the picture the AI creates, which again was done so beautifully that you're like, अच्छा यार, this is important journalism, right? It makes people like look up and say, okay, this is interesting. And Pakistan has had that, right? But your point on that generation going away reminded me of the fact that when I was beginning to learn about the economy, I would read Khurram's pieces, Khurram Hussein's pieces. Khurram did a fantastic revelation on CPEC's master plan from dawn, after
That
which
was a
Ishaq
big
Dar,
one.
right? And Ishaq
Mhm.
Dar called him an agent. वो press conference भी
Yeah,
हुई थी
yeah,
उसके
yeah,
बाद.
yeah, yeah.
और कल 2023 में मैं बैठा हूँ, और the most interesting piece on the economy again is done by Khurram Hussain on the
Yeah.
debt and the fact that Pakistan will essentially run out of money, holding a bunch of assumptions constant by December. And I'm like, यार, why is it
एक
that
ही
Khurram
एक ही
ही
बंदा
कर
है.
रहा है?
हाँ,
एक खुर्रम
हाँ,
और भी
हाँ.
हैं, यंग भी हैं, अरीबा है, फसी है, और भी अच्छे लोग हैं, बट इस तरह का
But
लॉन्ग फॉर्म
गिनती.
गिनती करना, डॉक्यूमेंट्स में जाना, उसके साथ महीनों गुजारना, लोगों को फोन करके वो डॉक्यूमेंट्स डेटा निकलवाना, और फिर उसको कंटेक्चुअलाइज करना, जो है, आई थिंक we should have had a lot more of that
Yes,
coming out by
yes.
now, but we don't, and I think that's the biggest risk over here.
Yeah, I don't blame young people for not wanting to join the media because the working conditions are so bad, especially for women. I really don't blame them. I used to be very angry about it, but I get it. But and the local universities, which brings me to that question you asked me, Ke, what do you do's and don'ts for young people? So I made a list, and like, don't do a degree in journalism. You don't need it. Mass comm की degree तो please नहीं करें. Okay. Study philosophy, literature, history. Okay. Because your ability to critically gather and present information comes from studying epistemologies, form and expression, not platforms. They should be aware that the industry is a sweatshop that will be run by exploitative states and mediocre, sycophantic middle managers. But you can shine. How can you shine? What you have to do is pick one beat. अच्छा, a lot of these kids, they come in, मैंने एक तो उनका crusader spirit होता है, तो उनको social issues पे काम करना है. Every issue is a social issue. Human interest story karni, bhai, every story is a human interest story. But they want to be generalists. I give them my example and say, I have only worked on Karachi and literally maybe sewage and water to actual drill down kiya hai maine. And log mera mazak udate hain. A lot of the other Sahafis, they say, bhai, tum national politics kyun nahi cover karti ho? I'm like, there's so many people covering national politics. Why would I do that? I'm the one of the two women who cover local government. Like, why would I do that? Pick a beat, because over time आपके sources develop होते हैं, वो फिर story चल के आती है आपके पास, आपको मजा भी आता है, your depth of knowledge of the field grows, you know. That's how you can really serve people. So उसपे I don't know, the kids, they don't believe me when I say this. They think it's old fashioned to have a beat. The other thing I would say is that you need a technical skill, not chat GPT, don't worry, whatever. I think data crunching, Excel, mapping, coding, data visualization, कोई एक ऐसी skill ले लें. मेरी हर स्टोरी में मैप जाता है. मेरा मजाक उड़ाते हैं कि माहिम की हर स्टोरी में वो ग्राफिक्स वाला बाल नोच रहा होता है बिकॉज इतने सारे गंदे गंदे मैप लाती हूँ सरकारी दफातर से और वो कहती हूँ इसको दोबारा रीड्रॉ करो. But that skill is much that'll supplement your journalism, you know. And I don't think AI is going to replace that, simply because gathering information in Pakistan from the black holes of government offices, none of that stuff is online. Okay, वो गंदे गंदे PDFs में आपको मिल गया तो बड़ी बात है. वो photos of notifications में आपको मिलेगा. So AI is not going to help you report on Pakistan, to the best of my knowledge. The on the ground information comes from you, like, you know, shoe leather reporting. Usme these skills.
And even sorry to interrupt on that point, but even in more developed economies, right, where things are still more digital, it's still not going to, in my view, because ultimately story का जो मुद्दा है वो तो human ने देना है ना आपको. तो अगर आप इंसान से बात करने के लायक नहीं हैं और जानते नहीं हैं उसको, उसके इंसेंटिव्स को नहीं जानते, you don't understand their psychology, you don't understand their politics of that institution, AI is not going to tell you any of that. AI तो आपको समरी देगा जब रिपोर्ट हो चुका है सारा कुछ. तो रिपोर्ट तो किसी ने फिर भी करना है उसके बारे में.
Yeah, and I thought it was very interesting that the Washington Post just recently put out, the editor put out a thing saying we will not, our humans are going to be writing our stories and we will have a lab that will experiment because the ethics of AI is very complicated. So बहुत सारे लोग जैसे NLEs बहुत वो हुए हुए थे कि भाई वीडियो एडिटिंग मेरी नौकरी चली जाएगी. I understand their fear, but I mean they do have to have some ability to adapt. But that's where the journalism comes in, and I try to tell them कि आपको journalism करनी चाहिए. और वो किसी चीज पे भी कर सकते हैं. But there's also, because a lot of these people in the newsrooms, they come from very disadvantaged backgrounds, and so they're unable to expand their scope. I mean, that is where it truly becomes the difference between a local education and a foreign education. And I hate to say it, but this is actually very, very true. And I've seen lots of people, like I've taught people from Leari English, and they've gone on to do master's degrees from the University of Heidelberg. वो बात नहीं है. The thing is that the brain actually can't fathom. Like reporting के लिए आपको reports पढ़नी चाहिए. If you can't understand the English, you've got a problem, right? The World Bank report. If you are an NLE who wants to do a Google or a Facebook blueprint thing, you need to understand a little bit of English. यहाँ पे इनके बड़े barriers हैं, which is why these guys can't scale up, which is sad. But yeah, like I think, and I've given you a list of books which I keep sharing with young people. So I think there's still a lot of scope for anyone who wants to do journalism, but you won't get the good industry working conditions. However, if you are able to kind of crack it in English and do reporting on one beat, तो आप बहुत जल्दी superstar बन जाते हैं. People call me like an expert on Karachi. I'm not an expert on Karachi. मैंने कुल मतलब 10 बड़े piece लिखे होंगे. Can you imagine? That makes you an expert. Abroad, that would totally not be the standard, you know. So it's been very rewarding, but you know, anyone can do it with a little bit of like hard work, but you have to love doing it. You can't come to it with the sense of entitlement कि आपको newsroom बहुत अच्छा मिलेगा. It's not a multinational corporation. It's going to be, you know, and there's class issues. You have to learn how to, you know, get along with all kinds of people. And that's why reporters are my best friends and my peeps, you know, because you know they have so much knowledge, and you go out and you learn about the city or these beats or these places, because you have to be able to sit with anyone, and you know, go to places where you know you would not normally go. Like I remember sitting and having a cup of tea outside the AD morgue one night because one friend of mine said, चलो यार एक चीज मुझे चेक करनी है, तो सद खाने के बाहर दो लोग मुझे मिल रहे हैं, तो वहां चाय बैठ के पीते हैं. So I'm sitting outside the morgue having a cup of tea at 1 a.m. at night. Don't tell my dad. But it was an education, you know, which is why it's been, you know, really worthwhile.
No, and the books that you've sent are in the description for the audience, and I know that you always recommend them. Some of them I've heard from you before as well. And speaking of your reporters being your peeps, again, I remember when you were at Sama and we first met in person. You introduced me to Ruhan Ahmed, who's an amazing reporter, and I still vividly remember, to your point on like getting to know the beat. He was on the sort of Karachi political, like kya ho raha hai shehar ke andar beat, and I was like, कि क्या अपडेट है एमक्यूएम वगैरह की. तो यूज लाइक यार एमक्यूएम छोड़े, एक देयर इज न्यू बॉयज इन टाउन, उनका नाम है टीएलपी टाइप लोग हैं, वो हरी पगड़ी पहनते हैं और यू नो थोड़े बरेलवी टाइप के रेडिकल्स हैं. कीप एन आई आउट ऑन देम. एंड आई स्टिल रिमेंबर रूहान अबाउट दैट कॉन्वर्जेशन, एंड आई वाज लाइक that helped me sort of get a look ahead in terms of what was coming. So as the TLP phenomenon became bigger towards 2018 and onwards from that, I was like, you called it. And you called it because you were on the ground talking to people and seeing the shift that was happening in a city like Karachi about its politics and the MQM's diminishing role for various reasons, and sort of, you know, post kya kehte hain, Sunni Tehreek revival of Barelvi politics in the city, right? And that's why I agree with you. You gotta be friends with the reporters, because otherwise you're not gonna get that insight that most people will miss. So Mahim, thank you so much for taking out the time today.
Thanks for having me.
It's always wonderful talking to you, and wish you all the best in the future. And keep doing what you're doing. I think many of us learn a whole lot from that.
As long as you write for me whenever I commission next.
Well, okay. Just much like Majam Sethi told you, when I call you, you got to come back. You get dibs on that. When you call and say write something, I can't
You've
say
always
no.
been, you've been very sweet about it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks for having me. Okay, bye-bye.